Hi students, today we're going to talk about the topic apoptosis. I'm Dr. Deepika, Assistant Professor, Department of Physiology. So the learning objectives for this session are, at the end of the session, the student should be able to define what is apoptosis, the mechanism of action, how apoptosis works, and what are the causes, and a few applied aspects. So to begin with a few history related to apoptosis, the first scientist, German scientist Karl Vogt, he was the one who gave the idea about the principle of apoptosis. Next, Walter Fleming was the next scientist who said what is the process behind this programmed cell death. So apoptosis is also called as the programmed cell death. Okay, so the Greek word, the apoptosis, means it is the falling leaves. So as you see in this picture, the leaves falling off. So the word meaning apoptosis says as you age, the unwanted cells are removed, which is very physiological and essential for the body. And this process requires ATP. The causes for this process could be physiological, which is very essential to remove the unwanted cells or the old cells from the body, and sometimes it can also be pathological. The physiological causes for apoptosis could be the first reason, once the cells have completed their purpose. For example, the neutrophils or lymphocytes, the WBCs, once their function is over following an inflammation, they get died off, which is a physiological process of apoptosis. The second reason could be self-destructive cells. The immunosuppressants, which anti-immune bodies which are produced in your body, which are trying to suppress your host immune system, they are to be destroyed. The third, embryogenesis. So at the development of fetal life, the vestigial organs like your tail formation or the few webbed fingers, so all these slowly get deteriorated, which is also a physiological process of apoptosis. Next, a few odd cells like the pathogens, cancer cells or viruses or pathogens entering inside your body are destroyed by the process of apoptosis. And next is old cells, the old worn out cells which have to be replaced by a new type of cell. There apoptosis has a role. So next is hormonal, wherein during menopause or breastfeeding, following which the uterus returns back to its original size, and following weaning the breast return to its original size, which is also a cause for physiological apoptosis. The next we move on to pathological causes for apoptosis, which may be when the cells are exposed to radiations or any anti-cancer drugs or heat exposure. These are the pathological causes which induce apoptosis in a normal cell. So this activation, the process of pathological apoptosis, when it can be activated in a normal cell is when the positive signals are withdrawn. The energy, the nerve growth factors or the interleukins which are essential for the growth of a particular nerve or cell are deteriorating. When there is this positive signal is removed, there can be chances of pathological apoptosis. The next other means could be a new arrival of negative signals. When the normal cell is exposed to a lot of cellular stress or damage in the DNA, exposure to X-rays, radiations, chemotherapeutic drugs, or few death receptor ligands, their entry of the negative signals can cause apoptosis in a normal cells. So these are the reasons when a pathological apoptosis can happen in a person. So the mechanism. So once apoptosis has initiated, either it is physiological or pathological, it can happen through two pathways. One is the extrinsic pathway and the other one is the intrinsic pathway. Both these pathways meet at a final point, which is the activation of caspase enzyme, which is cysteine aspartate protease, which is the triggering point for apoptosis. So now we'll talk about the intrinsic pathway, which is also called as the mitochondrial pathway. The major stimuli for initiating this intrinsic pathway is exposure to cellular stress, increased oxidants, heat radiation, nutrition depression or hypoxia, DNA damage. All these can cause increase in the permeability of the mitochondrial membrane, which starts releasing cytochrome C. So this cytochrome C combines with APAF and forms apoptosome, which is the one which triggers this caspase enzyme, which is essential for apoptosis. Now coming to extrinsic pathway, the external environment decides, okay, this is a planned death where the cell has to be removed. So what happens, the tumor necrosing factor or FAS ligands, all these are activated and they start triggering this caspase 8, which is going to start the process of apoptosis. So the cell starts to shrink, the DNA fragments, chromatin condensation happens, all these initiate the process of apoptosis. So this is a picture showing both extrinsic and intrinsic pathway, how it happens inside a cell. So in the intrinsic pathway, we can see the mitochondria is stimulated, and that is why it is called as the mitochondrial pathway. So here the mitochondria gets more permeable, starts releasing cytochrome C, which is going to activate caspase 9 and thereby proceed to apoptosis. Whereas in the extrinsic pathway, it is because of the death receptors or any external factors which decide the cell to be dead, and in that case the caspase 8 is activated, and thereby finally both these pathways activate caspase 3 and thereby the process of apoptosis happens. So regulation of apoptosis. So there should always be a balance between the pro-apoptotic proteins, which are the proteins which initiate the process of apoptosis, and the factors which are against apoptosis. So BAX or BAK, these are the apoptotic initiating proteins, whereas BCL1, 2 and BCLX are the anti-apoptotic. So there is always a balance between these proteins which are going to regulate the process. Applied aspects. So when there is too much of apoptosis, a lot of apoptosis is happening unnecessarily, what happens, this neurodegenerative diseases can happen like Alzheimer's or osteoporosis or AIDS. And where there is too little, very less amount of apoptosis happening, the unwanted cell growth is seen, cancers and autoimmune diseases can happen. So recent advances in this field of apoptosis, caspase inhibitors, which can be used as a treatment for neurodegenerative diseases, and programmed death ligand inhibitors, which are used as a treatment for many cancers, and a few more are also being in development in future of which forms the future of regenerative medicine. When we talk about apoptosis, we should also know something about necrosis, where apoptosis is a planned programmed cell death, whereas necrosis is something which happens all of a sudden following an infection or inflammation. So the difference between apoptosis and necrosis is, in layman's term, we can say it is the cell murder in case of necrosis, or when apoptosis, it's just a planned death. And the difference, the points which you see here, when the apoptosis happens, it's a programmed cell death, whereas necrosis, it's a premature cell death. And in apoptosis, the process which happens there are, first the cells start shrinking, the membranes start forming blebs, bubble-like things, and the chromatin inside gets condensed, the nucleus gets fragments, there is no sign of inflammation, energy is utilized, and this entire process is caspase dependent. As we saw in the previous pictures, the intrinsic or the extrinsic pathway finally meet in the release of caspase. And this is very much essential for the organism to get rid of the unwanted cells or unwanted pathogens or embryogenesis. Whereas necrosis, there is a swelling of the cell. The membrane gets disrupted, there is no chromatin condensation or nucleus gets disorganized, and especially you have this inflammation, and this process does not need any energy requirement, and there is no role of caspase in necrosis. And this is very detrimental for the organism. So thus, to summarize, we have talked about apoptosis, which means the programmed cell death, and very essential for the human survival, where you have this both physiological causes for apoptosis and there is also sometimes pathological causes. And this happens by two pathways, extrinsic and intrinsic pathway, where both these pathways meet at a point, the release of caspase, which is essential for the process of apoptosis to happen. And this apoptosis is regulated by the balance in the pro-apoptotic proteins and the anti-apoptotic proteins. And this is going to be a very promising role in regenerative medicine. Thank you.